Something is happening in women's basketball right now that nobody has ever seen before. Not like this. Not with this kind of heat, this kind of money, and this kind of noise surrounding two players who are both only 24 years old. The WNBA A-Circumflex Euros, a league that spent decades fighting for respect, fighting for coverage, fighting for packed arenas. A-Circumflex Euros is suddenly the most talked about sports story in America. And at the center of it all, two names keep coming up. Every single day, on every single platform, in every single argument, you already know who they are. But here's what most people aren't telling you. The debate between Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers has moved way beyond a simple, who's better conversation. It has become something much bigger. It's touching on fairness, on star power, on officiating bias, on locker room drama, on injury conspiracies, on all-star voting wars, and on the financial future of an entire league. These two players are being compared, dissected, celebrated, and criticized every single week. A-Circumflex Euros, and neither one of them asked for any of it. This is the story of the rivalry nobody planned, the debate nobody can settle, and the two players who are building something that women's basketball has never had before. By the time this video is over, you're going to understand exactly why this argument is so fierce. A-Circumflex Euros, and you're going to have to pick a side. Before we even get to Paige Bueckers, we have to understand what Caitlin Clark actually did to this league. Because without understanding that, none of the rest of this makes any sense. Caitlin Clark didn't just enter the WNBA as a good basketball player. She entered it as a cultural event. Years before she played a single professional game, she had already broken NCAA scoring records that had stood for decades. She had turned college arenas into sold-out spectacles. She had made people who had never watched a women's basketball game in their lives suddenly care about every possession. The kind of attention she generated during her final season at Iowa was unlike anything the sport had seen. A-Circumflex Euros, the kind of thing that usually only happens when an athlete transcends the game entirely and becomes something closer to a movement. When she arrived in Indiana in 2024, the Fever had been a struggling franchise. Almost overnight, that changed. Gainbridge Fieldhouse started selling out. Road games started selling out. Ticket prices on the secondary market went through the roof. Games featuring Clark and the Fever were suddenly drawing television audiences that hadn't been seen in women's basketball for over 2 decades. In 2024 alone, 16 WNBA games surpassed 1 million viewers. A-Circumflex Euros, and the Fever were involved in 14 of them. That's not a coincidence. That's one player pulling an entire league into a conversation it had been trying to have for years. The business side of what Clark did is almost impossible to fully describe. She is widely credited with driving roughly 25% or more of the WNBA's recent economic surge. She helped build the case for a landmark $2.2 billion media rights deal. She contributed to expansion fees shooting up as new franchises recognized that women's basketball had arrived as a legitimate financial property. She made the WNBA a topic of conversation in sports bars, in offices, in households that had never given women's hoops a second thought. WNBA legend Lisa Leslie said it plainly. Never in the history of the WNBA have we had a player force teams to play in larger arenas. Indiana is now moving to a 20,000-seat arena. That number means something. And on the court, Clark backed it all up. She played with a kind of fearlessness that made every game feel like something was about to happen. Deep threes from well beyond the arc. Pinpoint passes that came out of nowhere. Playmaking that left defenses scrambling and fans on their feet. She made her sophomore season look like a preview of something generational. A-Circumflex Euros. And even when injuries forced her to miss time in 2025, the noise around her never quieted down for a second. But while all of that was happening, someone else was quietly getting ready to make her own statement. Paige Bueckers arrived at UConn in 2020 as the #1 recruit in the country. A-Circumflex Euros, something that often means more pressure than it does promise. But she didn't buckle under it. In her very first season as a college player, she did something that had never been done before. She became the first freshman in history to win the National Women's Player of the Year award. That alone should tell you everything you need to know about the level she was operating at before most players her age had even settled into college life. What made Bueckers special from the start wasn't just ability. A-Circumflex Euros, it was the way she played. She moved through defenses with a calm that felt almost unnatural for someone so young. She rarely forced things. She rarely panicked. She read the game at a speed that coaches at every level had been gushing about since she was in high school. UConn head coach Gino Auriemma, who has coached some of the greatest women's basketball players in history, was not shy about how impressed he was. And Gino Auriemma does not give out compliments casually. The injuries came, though, and they came hard. A tibial plateau fracture and partial lateral meniscus tear in her left knee in 2021. Then, before her junior season, she tore the ACL in that same left knee acircumflex Euros, an injury that wiped out her entire 2022-23 season. Anyone watching from the outside would have been forgiven for wondering whether the version of Buchers that had looked unstoppable as a freshman would ever fully come back. She was asked about it during her recovery. Her response was simple and direct. "I want to be the type of player I was before the injury acircumflex Euros, but better." She wasn't just talking. She came back and proved it. She led UConn back to the national championship game and eventually acircumflex Euros. In her senior season acircumflex Euros, she won the national title and took home the Wade Trophy as the best player in college basketball. By the time her UConn chapter ended, she had been through more physical setbacks than most NBA players experience in a full career, and she had come out on the other side with a clearer understanding of who she was as a player. Not someone who relies on athleticism alone. Someone who has built her game on intelligence, timing, and an ability to do the right thing at the right moment. The Dallas Wings selected her first overall in the 2025 WNBA draft. And what happened next genuinely shocked people. The conventional wisdom when a highly touted prospect joins a bad team is that things get hard fast. The Dallas Wings were about as bad as it gets heading into 2025 acircumflex Euros. They had just finished a 9-win season, were on their third coach in 4 years, and had very little around Buchers to work with. The expectation from many analysts was a long, grinding adjustment period for a player stepping into a losing environment after a college career that included significant time lost to injury. Instead, Buchers turned in one of the most decorated rookie seasons in WNBA history. She averaged 19.2 points, 5.4 assists, and 3.9 rebounds per game over 36 games acircumflex Euros, numbers that only scratch the surface of how dominant she was. She became the fastest player in league history to reach 200 points, 50 rebounds, and 50 assists. She set a Wings franchise rookie scoring record, surpassing a mark that had stood since 2019. She was named WNBA Rookie of the Month for 3 consecutive months acircumflex Euros, something only 9 players in the entire history of the league had done before her. On August 20th, she tied the single-game rookie scoring record with 44 points acircumflex Euros, and did it while shooting at an absurd efficiency level, becoming the first player in league history to score at least 40 points while shooting over 80% from the floor. She ran away with the Rookie of the Year award, but here's what the numbers don't fully capture. Even while the Wings were losing acircumflex Euros, Dallas finished 10-34 in 2025 acircumflex Euros. Buchers was showing something that can't be measured in points per game. She was leading. She was communicating. She was holding veterans accountable and holding herself to an even higher standard than anyone expected from a first-year player on a struggling team. Veteran guard Eric Augenboyle, who had carried the Wings' expectations for 6 seasons by herself, was direct about what she saw from Buchers. "She's super efficient every night. She's just really elite." And that was just year 1. She spent the off-season living in the weight room. She ate better. She prioritized sleep. She played in the unrivaled 3-on-3 league, where she made the all-unrivaled first-team acircumflex Euros, and her first-year unrivaled contract reportedly paid her more than her entire 4-year WNBA rookie deal. She came back to Dallas for her sophomore season noticeably stronger, more physical, and with a clear intent to take the next step. Something was about to shift, and the Clark-Buchers rivalry was about to go to a completely different level. May 9th, 2026, Indiana Fever versus Dallas Wings, season opener. Both teams had championship ambitions. Both fan bases were primed. And the two biggest names in women's basketball were going head-to-head on national television with 2.49 million people watching A Circumflex Euros, making it the second most-watched regular-season WNBA game in the history of ABC and ESPN coverage. That number alone tells you what this rivalry has become. Both Clark and Buchers finished with 20 points. Statistically, they were nearly identical on paper. But the conversation after the game was anything but even. Dallas won 107-104, and the dominant storyline was Buchers' efficiency. She hit 80% of her field goal attempts. She played with the smooth, unhurried confidence that her coaches had been raving about all spring. Meanwhile, Clark A Circumflex Euros, dealing with a back issue she had been managing A Circumflex Euros, shot just 38.9% from the floor and turned the ball over 5 times, including 2 offensive fouls. Dallas also went after Clark on the defensive end aggressively, attacking her in coverage repeatedly and scoring on all 6 possessions in the first half when Clark was the primary defender. It was one game. One early season result with 1,000 variables. But it was fuel. For Buchers' supporters, it was evidence that the gap between the two players was closing fast A Circumflex Euros, or maybe had already closed. For Clark's supporters, it was an asterisk A Circumflex Euros. She wasn't fully healthy, the season had just started, and one game is a sample size that means almost nothing over a 44-game schedule. What it unquestionably did was confirm that whenever these two players are on the same floor, something major is happening. Sport stops and pays attention. That alone is valuable beyond anything a box score can measure. But the season kept going, and things around Clark kept getting louder. If you've spent any time on social media during the 2026 WNBA season, you already know that the coverage surrounding Caitlin Clark has developed its own gravitational pull A Circumflex Euros, one that seems to operate completely independently of what is actually happening on the basketball court. The injury report situation is a perfect example. In late May, Clark was a late scratch before a game against the Portland Fire A Circumflex Euros, a back issue that had been bothering her. The Fever hadn't listed her on the injury report the day before, which violated league protocol. The WNBA issued a warning, a straightforward situation. In virtually any other context in professional sports, that's a brief news story and nothing more. In this case, it set off a week-long media storm with fans and content creators spinning theories that ranged from Clark being secretly suspended for an argument with an assistant coach, to claims that Fever head coach Stephanie White was deliberately benching her, to speculation that Indiana was preparing to trade her. One Ringer piece captured the absurdity of it well. Throwing something against the wall A Circumflex Euros, the theory that invokes the most rage, that hints most shamelessly at conspiracy and sabotage A Circumflex Euros, will likely stick. Technical foul she received for arguing with a referee against the Sparks became another flashpoint. And then, shortly after, reports surfaced A Circumflex Euros, framed as a fairness issue A Circumflex Euros, that when Buchers had done something similar on the court and received a technical, Clark was let off without one for a comparable incident. That discrepancy became its own debate, with journalist Carrie Champion pointing to the differential treatment publicly and igniting another round of back-and-forth online. Then came the all-star voting numbers. Early returns showed Clark ranked 5th A Circumflex Euros, behind Aja Wilson, Paige Buchers, Clark's own teammate Aaliyah Boston, and Breena Stewart. Buchers sat second overall with nearly 300,000 votes. For a segment of Clark's fanbase, the response was immediate and intense. "So embarrassing," was the phrase that spread everywhere. Others pointed out that all-star voting is early, fan-driven, and historically unreliable as a measure of anything beyond social media mobilization. Both reactions told you something true. Here's what the smartest analysis of all this points to. Clark's position in the sport is so enormous that every piece of information connected to her A Circumflex Euros, every missed shot, every injury update, every referee call A Circumflex Euros, gets run through a machine that converts it into content, regardless of whether it deserves to be. Her biggest critics and her most passionate defenders are both feeding the same algorithmic beast. And the result is a constant state of noise that makes it genuinely difficult to separate what's actually happening from what's being manufactured for engagement. What is actually happening? The Fever are a legitimate playoff contender with a net rating that places them in the upper half of the league. Clark is averaging over 20 points per game, leading the league in assists for stretches of the season, and doing things on the playmaking side that put her in the same sentence as the greatest guards in the history of women's basketball. And she's doing all of it at 24 years old, in her third WNBA season, while being scrutinized at a level that no player in this league has ever dealt with before. Meanwhile, Buchers is doing something almost completely different, a circumflex Euros, and it's just as impressive in its own right. Let's put the real data on the table, because this is where the debate gets genuinely interesting. Through the first several weeks of the 2026 season, Paige Buchers is averaging 18.7 points, 6 assists, and 3.6 rebounds per game. She's the only player in the entire WNBA ranking in the top 10 in points, assists, and three-pointers made simultaneously. That's not just impressive a circumflex Euros. It's the kind of all-around statistical profile that separates legitimate superstars from very good players. Her efficiency numbers are also staggering. She's converted over 50% of her field goal attempts and is maintaining a true shooting percentage north of 60%. Her assist-to-turnover ratio is one of the best in the league. She has already become the fastest player in WNBA history to reach 250 assists while recording fewer than 100 turnovers a circumflex Euros, a milestone that speaks directly to how rarely she makes mistakes with the basketball. Clark, for her part, is doing things that aren't as clean statistically, but are arguably more difficult. She is averaging more than 20 points and pushing close to 9 assists per game. She recently became the fastest player in WNBA history to reach 250 points and 100 assists in a single season. She is creating her own offense at a rate that almost no guard in the league can match a circumflex Euros, pulling defenders toward her from beyond 30 feet and forcing defenses to account for her presence the moment she crosses half-court. Her turnovers remain a genuine concern. She is currently averaging over 5 per game, a number that has followed her through each WNBA season and will need to improve if the Fever are going to make a deep playoff run. But the counter-argument is just as valid. Clark takes risks with the ball that no other player in the league attempts, and some of those turnovers are the price of operating at a creative level nobody else can reach. What advanced metrics reveal is a picture of two players with very different value propositions. Buchers' player efficiency rating sits at 21.4 this season a circumflex Euros, an elite number that reflects how much she contributes relative to the minutes she's on the floor, with almost no wasted possessions. Clark's impact is harder to capture in traditional efficiency stats because so much of what she does a circumflex Euros, the gravity she creates, the way she opens up the floor for teammates, the defensive attention she demands from the moment she touches the ball a circumflex Euros, doesn't always show up in a box score. What both sets of numbers confirm is something that the on-court product makes obvious. These are two of the 5 best players in the WNBA right now, operating in completely different ways, and you'd be making your team worse by taking either of them off the floor. But the question of which one is more valuable a circumflex Euros, on court, off court, or both a circumflex Euros, is where things get genuinely complicated. The stylistic contrast between these two players is real, and it's worth slowing down to actually understand it a circumflex Euros, because it's the engine driving everything else. Caitlin Clark is a weapon of disruption. She operates by breaking what's normal about basketball. The deep threes that force defenses to guard her 30 feet from the basket. The cross-court passes that arrive before defenders have time to react. The no-look dimes, the pull-up jumpers off the dribble, the fearless decision to just let it fly from somewhere nobody else would even consider launching from. Every time she has the ball, there's a feeling in the arena a circumflex Euros, even a mild sense of danger a circumflex Euros, that something unexpected could happen at any second. That's a rare quality. Most players are predictable. Clark is not. Opposing coaches know they have to account for her on every trip up the floor, and accounting for her inevitably creates something for someone else. She doesn't just produce individually a circumflex Euros, she makes her entire offense harder to defend. Paige Buchers is a weapon of precision. She doesn't try to force the unexpected. She executes the expected at such an elite level that defenses can't stop her anyway. Her shot selection is remarkably disciplined a-circumflex Euros. She consistently takes good looks, turns down contested attempts, and finds the open man when the defense collapses on her. Her ability to run a pick-and-roll, to set up teammates in transition, to control tempo without rushing or slowing down when things get tight a-circumflex